And we're live. Good
Here.
afternoon. Yes, we are here. Hello, everyone. We are a minute or so early, so we will give people some time to start dialing in to join us. And I've just seen you join the collaboration session, Pete. So let me just open up one of our files. We should have done this beforehand, but we are as prepared as ever. If I open up the requirements metadata file, can you? Yeah, we can see each other's changes in that. Beautiful.
I can see you. I haven't tried doing anything yet, though.
Isn't there a thing in Markdown where you can do you can do a to-do list item and close it?
To-do list?
Yeah,
yeah, it's like
is it not
it's
square brackets with an
square brackets
with an X in maybe? I think.
Task 1. Yeah.
Let's try that. Let's just do
task.
So yeah. Welcome everyone to a session of me and Pete discussing basic Markdown formatting, which is where we expected.
It's the content that sells. What can you say?
Exactly. We are going to be doing an Agent Force Markdown bot today or agent as the correct term would now be, to help us write our requirements. So welcome, Pete. Good to see you again.
Welcome to you too. Yeah, you too. How are you doing?
Good. It's been 3 weeks since we were last here.
3 weeks. Dreamforce happened.
Yeah, it's
Dreamforce happened. So that was a thing.
Yes. That small conference.
That small conference. Did you go this year?
I didn't go this year. No, it's one of those things that I went a couple of years back, and I'd like to do TDX. I feel like I'd get more value now at a TDX, but I suppose if I went to Dreamforce's representing my ISV, it might be more useful. It's a very expensive trip for like.
It is. I'm trying to line up to make TDX happen next year. So that's my hope. Is to be there for that. I've got a couple of different avenues that I might pursue with that. And I've already tentatively reserved where I want to stay. So because you got to do it early. So there you go. Pro tip, everyone. If you even think you might be going to a Salesforce conference in San Francisco, get your hotel reservation even before, because you can always cancel it.
Yeah, that's the one. I mean, again, we are 2 minutes in and we're already way off track. But that'd be my my biggest request of Mark Benioff if I ever met him, is please just move your conferences to Las Vegas, because it's a city built to host conferences, and I could get a room for $100 a night rather than $300.
Yeah, that is.
And it'll be a decent room at the Venetian rather than half a closet in Oakland somewhere,
or a boat.
Yeah, the dream boat.
The dream boat. I knew people who stayed on it. They seem to have a good time. So
I went to the.
That was a thing.
They had an MVP party on it.
Did they? I never made it to the dream boat that year. That was I just never made it.
So they had an MVP party on it, and it was a bit weird because you had to go through airline security to get on the boat to go and.
Yeah.
In fact, I think if I recall correctly, our friend Kerry Townsend stayed on the boat, and she was telling me that it was great, except that every time you wanted to go on or off the boat, you had to go through a full security check.
Interesting. And then you probably had to, or was that before they started doing the sort of airport level security checks at the conference?
Probably before they did it at the conference. I think it was just the boat that year.
Conference. Yeah.
Wow. Anyway,
there you go.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So for those who
welcome back to the live stream of Paul and I dating ourselves. So
yeah, this is just. I mean, this is the reason we're doing a free stream on YouTube rather than OnlyFans, is because no one would pay to listen to this rubbish. So
there we go. So today, we're gonna. Should we do a little recap of what we did last time first?
Yes.
Yeah. So last 3 weeks ago, last session, we wrote a basic trigger. We only got as far as the insert part of the trigger, and Well, what you would say in the UK here is in Blue Peter fashion, very UK term, but and more like a cooking show, I guess most people would identify with. We did some work behind the scenes, and we've fleshed that trigger out a bit further in the ensuing weeks, where we now have some update logic and we have some delete logic.
We do, and we have tests to go with it as well, which is the most important thing. And we have my debug statements in there, so I will clear them out. This was me trying to debug why Copilot had helpfully thrown me off balance. A word of warning to anyone using Copilot.
Is that update statement there? Is that the one that you were meant to change to delete? Or
No, that one's to update the accounts. The delete. So
right.
for
Okay.
those wanting some behind the scenes fun, I was when Pete and I were joining earlier on, I was just finishing writing some tests and doing this, and I thought, I'll get the delete one done to save us doing that, so we can move on to something more interesting. Now, and Copilot was helping me write the tests and helping me write some of the code, and me being sort of half paying attention to coding, half chatting to Pete about what he'd been up to for the past couple of weeks was like, yep, that looks good. And to test the delete trigger, we had 2 lines where we were actually just using the word update because Copilot had seen the word update most recently.
I mean, delete is technically updating it, right?
Exactly, yeah. Delete is updating
In
the
the
database
literary
that no
sense.
longer exists.
Very good.
So we've written our delete trigger, we've written our update trigger. Everything is now working wonderfully, and we have some tests. Let's, in fact, just show that this is not smoke and mirrors. That we have some tests that they are all running and everything is working fine.
Yep.
And what we're going to focus on in today's stream is refactoring this. So we're going to start off by probably having a little conversation about what refactoring is and why you might want to do it. So there we go. All of my tests are running wonderfully. We have a 93% org-wide coverage. Neither Pete nor I are going to get told off by our engineering manager. So, or the Scrum Master or whoever is going to be taking care of that. Today's aim is to kind of talk about refactoring. So why we might want to refactor this code, where it's going to take us, and why we want to go down that path. Because there is a really good conversation here that is, this is working. Why are we touching it? And there's the very good adage of perfect is the enemy of good, and we're all paid here to deliver working software for our users. And so there's a good conversation to have around why do we care about having a trigger handler framework, or why do we care about refactoring this into different ways at all, and how do we even identify that there's some refactoring to do?
On the run up to this, I was having some thoughts about this because I have a tendency, I didn't study computer science. I kind of taught myself and grew into learning how to do all of this. In a way, I've been guilty oftentimes of hearing a term, seeing it done enough to get a sense for what it means, and then just sort of getting on with my life. And I realized that I've never actually looked up what exactly refactoring is, like what's the definition of that. And so, I thought starting out with that would be interesting, and just understanding. I did a bit of reading, but out of Wikipedia, if you want to start with there, changing the structure of code without changing its external behavior is, I think, the most succinct way of putting it. And then, a little bit further on, it got into a section on motivation. Why do you do this? And, there's a bunch of things that it brings up: maintainability, extensibility, readability. And then it brought up this one thing that I thought, this is a really interesting concept to explore. Refactoring is usually motivated by noticing a code smell. And I think I'd heard this term before, but again, like another term that just sort of washed over me. Because, normally we think of we think of the reason we do things as being very sort of concrete and, based on some kind of empirical proof. But code smell isn't that. It's a bit subjective.
I think that's yeah. I think code smell is, and I think we need to just maybe start by defining the difference between code smell and like personal preference. Because so
Mhm.
last previously when we were coding, one of the things that you and I were discussing a little bit was the personal preferences between like so as an example, let me share my screen again, and I can show you a good example of differences in personal preference. Um, I won't say where Peter's a heathen and where I'm, correct, but different personal preferences,
I don't mind
and
being a
hopefully
heathen, but that's fine.
is things like here. So the binding mark for the colon. So I, being a puritanical person, would always write this as that. And the mad logic in my head is because I am telling the reader that this is the variable I am binding to. The real reason I know that I do it that way, and I'm fully aware of this, is that the first sets of code I looked at had it done that way, and everyone did it that way in the team I was in at Financial Force. And if I'd have done it in another way, I'd have been called like a heathen for doing it that
I
way.
hated
Yeah, but like, so it is literally I'm aware of personal, like it is a personal preference about like how you first started reading and writing it. But
Yeah.
I will I will sometimes have a couple of drinks and die on that hill. That this is any other way is incorrect. But those things
Absolutely.
don't matter because
Yeah.
it has no effect on the code whatsoever on its running, reading, or anything like that about where that colon is. You know,
Right.
Same with this fun thing where different people do that or that or that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like, there's again, how you choose to do that is between you and your chosen deity.
So
Like,
is spaces versus tabs a code preference thing?
so spaces versus tabs, I think is a file formatting thing. That one I
Yeah.
actually think matters because for those unfamiliar with what we're banging on about here, there is a long held argument between whether or not you should use whether when you tab like this, it should create it as spaces or as a tab character, which are different characters in the Unicode uh,
Yeah.
alphabet, and that is why it should be spaces rather than tabs. It didn't matter on Windows. I think that was the difference, wasn't it? On like Windows, is that tabs. There was a thing where like it was only when you put it in like a non-Microsoft proprietary branded awful system
Mm,
that it actually changed the formatting. And so like
okay.
because spaces have a distinct size, whereas tabs don't, depending upon the system.
Yeah, I'm not sure. My only real recollection of that is the cultural moment where the guy in Silicon Valley couldn't stay in his relationship with somebody who was very compatible with, except for the fact that one of them liked spaces and the other one did tabs. So
Well, there you go. I'll be going to like. I mean, I haven't asked my wife this. I should have done that really earlier on. Like, I should go back and check. Um,
so I think there's some there I
so the
so in
sorry.
doing the after update,
Mhm.
so getting to sort of code smell, um and also kind of very much into refactoring. If you look at lines 14 through 17, there's a little bit of logic in there where, we're sticking a count into a map. And if you go down, so that's the after insert phase of this
Oh, sorry.
particular
After
trigger.
update. Here.
But if you go to after update, I'm basically doing the same thing 2 more times. I mean, if you look at line 43 through 46 and lines 51 through 55, like, that logic is, I'm essentially breaking the cardinal rule of don't repeat yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and even though the one on line 44 is doing a negative increment, it's still an increment, and there's a way that you could abstract all 3 of those into, or basically turn, instead of using a technical term like abstract, but, to be more, descriptive, I could write some code that could be called that would that, could serve the job of what is essentially duplicate code in 3 different places in this trigger.
Yeah, and I
And so
think
that's a bit more code smell, I would say. It's perfectly
yeah, I think
working, but it's not quite right.
yeah, I was gonna say I think that the first thing I always think of when it's refactoring is is where can I do a thing once rather than 5 times? Like
Yeah,
that's always the first place I look at is how do I make my code drier, which is DRY. Don't repeat yourself for.
yep, yep,
Um, but yes, then the idea of the smell I think is a very abstract one for people that aren't used to the idea of like, hey, what does good code look like? And I said I think on a comment the other day that like one of the things I was taught so I'm also a self-taught programmer, but when I first had programming jobs with people, I was told by those that were infinitely smarter than me, don't write any code, go away and read some. Like yeah. And it's to go for a very highfalutin kind of example, it's a bit like good artists probably spend a good amount of time looking at pictures and
mhm.
looking at art rather than just trying to paint. You need to understand what makes a good composition and what makes it work, rather than it just being just trying to hammer it out.
And I think that's very true. Like, that concept and that, idea, like, that plays out in so many different ways, whether it's, art, code, sport, anything where you can learn by watching someone else's experience, yeah, absolutely, like, go do that because somebody will think of and show you something that you would have maybe never conceived of, and that'll
Okay.
make you better at it.
So, so I think so. Yeah, so we're going to try going through refactoring this and starting off to think about how we look for these smells, how we can improve things. Um, One of the other, just as a side note for anyone who I think Peter won't be offended if I say that Peter and I are going to do some refactoring here as a pair of people giving out opinions with very little basis and just trying to make our code work. If you want a proper book on refactoring,
There
I
we
can
go.
recommend this huge tome. It is by a wonderful group of people like Martin Fowler, who I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, who's written a lot of big enterprise architecture books, is the main author. But Kent Beck, who came up with TDD, has written parts of it. Eric Gamma, who is of the famous Gang of Four, wrote the foreword. So it's a very lots of smart people have written stuff in here, and it's that good thing of reading more code than you write. It's in kind of an abstracty C-ish language, so very worthwhile looking at for those that are interested in such things. So
Very good.
one
Should
of the
we
things
should we
that
should we mention so this was something that I was thinking about. If there's code smell, is there such a thing as org smell?
yes, um, this was a really good kind of talking point we had. Not to ruin it for the viewer, but Pete and I apparently prepare some of this by having a conversation for 20 minutes beforehand to think about what we're going to talk about. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, when you brought this up, I really like the concept of it, because I think, and we'll kind of touch upon this, I think, when we talk about other things later on, but Salesforce is different. Um, and let's also say we're just talking about current standard platform that everyone's used to, not like an agent going away and doing its own thing with Data Cloud. Like the core
Right.
platform
Yeah.
is very different to any other programming or development experience. And your org is such a unique thing that I do think that there's something that's an org smell, because I think there's a series of good practices we have around an org, and that can be anything from a correct data model, like understanding the difference between something really basic, understanding the difference between like a master detail and a lookup relationship, all the way through to um, code setup and structure, object sharing permissions, data duplicates. There's some orgs that we've seen, we've all seen, but some orgs I can tell you I've seen where there are tens of thousands of duplicate records.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Or
that's
like the
not,
same thing stored in like, tens of fields, in the same
yeah.
object.
yeah, stamping things on records when you could just use a formula field is one of mine. Or now, like just what's the on dynamic layouts where you can pull in fields from parent objects.
I've not played around with that, so
Yeah,
that's cool.
So like, but to kind of go back to your point, I think there's a really good thing around an org smell where, and I think because when we were talking about this and I went away to make my coffee, I was thinking about some examples of org smells that I've come across that kind of are indicators, and one of them is just well, one of them is a really kind of easy one to think of, which is org speed, which is the
Okay.
ability for you to just load and save and change records through the system, and it feels pretty, like I have this soapbox I get on, and I'm going to apologize to Peter who's heard me on this soapbox at least once already today, and if not, but the thing that irritates me more than anything in the world is people do not actually use their software. Like, you need to sit, like, if you are building something for Salesforce, go and spend like an hour or two pretending you're in that job role. If you are building something for an agent, spend half an hour like just dialing yourself and seeing how easy it is to answer that phone call, go through the process and do it again and again and again. Because there's some poor human that, like, you can sit there and be like, I've tested it in my happy path work and it takes
Right.
10 seconds to save, but I don't care. Like, there's some poor person that sat there banging their head against the desk every time they're saving a record because you've got like 10 seconds worth of stuff running. So,
It's the Salesforce version of it. It worked on my machine. So,
oh, yeah. And as well, like, because as developers, we're really bad at testing things
yeah.
as a
Yeah.
user would, because you're just
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm going to put in test@test.com as my email and test and test
Right.
as my first and last name. And that's all I'm going to do is hit save
Yeah.
and not think about, whoa, do I need these other 400 fields on the page layout to fill out? And are they in the right place for me to do so?
It also reminds me of something. So this was a Mike Gerholt thing way back in the days of his Button Click Admin podcast, and he called it Sabwa, which
Oh,
was
yeah. That
Salesforce
is,
administration by walking around.
yes.
And I think like
Jody,
developers need to adopt that practice too. Like just go sit with your user.
Jody Herbeck in her
Okay.
book, Awesome Admin, no, Rockstar Admin. What? I've got it on the shelf somewhere. How to be a rockstar admin. She has the same thing about, like, if you're not spending a good amount of time doing that, you're not doing it, because there's also a really good chance for you to go in and actually find really little things you can do
Right.
that are like change someone's life. But for you, it's like, oh, I've just
Right.
done this one little tweak that took 2 seconds. But for the poor person who said, it's like, oh, you're a savior.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Excellent.
so I think that was one of my first org smells, was the idea that like the system is just a bit slow to go around.
Hmm.
Um, the other one was that it was like brittle, and brittle was
Right.
like a really difficult concept. I thought about how to kind of define brittality, brittleness.
Riddleness. Yeah. I think that's
Brittlicity, I think, is the correct one. But like how to define that, and there was an org I worked on a few years back where it had field servicing and service cloud, and lots and lots of things had been done on it, and the implementation had been done without a Salesforce partner or without like a Salesforce Pro involved, if you know what I mean.
okay. Yeah.
And I mean this with love to anyone that was involved in that implementation who might be listening. You could tell, like, and there was just things that fall over all the time. So like it's kind of that like whack-a-mole, where you'd sort of like you'd
Mhm.
smack a bug over here and then one would pop up over there. It's like, well, how is that connect? Like, why does changing an opportunity stage affect like my field service project? What's going on? Like,
Oh God.
and
Yeah.
the mobile app's now not working and all sorts of things like that. And the business had fundamental kind of process problems they hadn't figured out because they just grown so quickly and organically.
Right.
Yeah, that to me is another big org smell of, like, if your org is like a deck of, like a house of cards where moving one causes everything to tremor, you got a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
Yeah, I mean,
cool.
is there anything you can think of that you've come across?
Not. I mean, I not as such. I to me, like just the idea of applying that concept of code smell to orgs, I think, is sort of an equalizer because org smell can, anybody can make that happen. And, anything that gets beyond the constant sort of push pull of, you know, this is Apex's fault versus this is Flow's fault that you see on social media. If we can just like agree that like there's certain things that anybody can do to mess up an org, I think maybe it gets us past that and maybe in a more productive state. So I don't know. So
Yeah, no,
that's why I liked it, is that it's an equalizer. Like, yeah, org smell has nothing to do with code, or I should say it has everything to do with anything you can do to the org, whether that's code or configuration. So
I mean, I'll be honest. I just like the idea of having asking the question, "How does your org smell?" Like, just is your org a bit whiffy today? It's a that's a very British thing to say, isn't it?
it's very Whiffy is definitely a
Is
British
your org a bit
ism.
whiffy? Anyway, so we
Yeah.
were talking about kind of code smells and things like that, and one of the things I think, code smells, org smells, and kind of that concept. One of the things I think we could do as a first pass, perhaps then together, is let's go through this code and start to think about where we got things that are maybe. So let's go through a first pass, in fact, and think about where we got things that could be improved
Mhm.
without changing the code structure, and then how we might think about extracting it and why, and then maybe we could start doing some of the drier stuff on after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah.
Because the reason I say this is one of the things that's popped into my head as I was rereading this code earlier is we have done something quite interesting here, which is we have not looked at our data model. Well, there's two things we haven't looked at our data model on, one which you spotted and one which I've just seen kind of earlier on, which
Okay.
is we're using this task status here, right?
Right.
And we've got, what's the cardinal sin that we've committed right here? We have hard coded a value, and that
Oh,
is
well,
that is naughty, naughty, Peter and Paul. Because
fair enough.
mainly, I
Yeah.
mean, if this is in a non-English, we have to remember that there is a world that isn't speaking English out there using Salesforce.
Yep, that's fair.
Number one,
Yep.
but which this wouldn't matter so much because I think the pick list value would still be completed.
Mhm.
But um, what if they had multiple ones that were closed because our requirement was when a task is closed,
Yep.
not when a task is marked as completed. And
Yep.
so
Yep. Yep.
we have a field which is called is closed.
Ooh.
What I then realized this would allow us to do is down here, we could tie it because obviously we've got a number of values in here.
Yeah, and you can see that I was thinking about that when I did
Yeah,
the
yeah,
update trigger because, like, initially, so my first pass on this was just an if else, right? So if completed,
yeah,
else do the other. And then I was like, "Oh, wait a second. Like what if exactly the thing that you said, like what if another value comes to mean completed? Is there a way that I can write this code so that it's easier to take that into account?" And yes, there's still hard coded values, so like I don't know there's an easy way around that with a switch statement because you're comparing to a literal. But regardless, like that was absolutely in my thinking when I chose to use the switch statement versus the if else.
yeah,
But I think that's a really interesting thing to point out, which is that there's an is closed. There's something that says like closed. So yeah.
yeah. Which is the pair of us for maybe not just sitting and thinking about that last time. So if we do,
Yeah.
so are you okay with the idea then that let's do a quick refactor
Yeah.
to is closed? Because what we can do here is we're going to show people the magic of if task status. All right, so let's do this. So if dot, because we only care about when it is. So if task status.
Well, so I'm
Ah,
getting status up above, right?
yes. So this is
So
a different thing, isn't it? Because we're
yeah.
checking the differences between statuses here. So what we want
Right.
to do here is maybe just change this switch to be an if.
Yeah, I think that's probably safe.
Yeah. So,
If we can assume, and I think we can, that it is the status change that causes closure to happen. then I think that the check for change there, like,
Yes,
has the change happen to the right field? Alternatively, like, could we not just compare the is closed change value? Because that would work just as well, right?
we could do, yes. So let's do that. So I'm gonna, just because I don't like red lines everywhere, and I'm, you know,
Okay.
anyone who
Yeah.
knows me knows I get a little bit funny
You're getting
about
twitchy,
things.
Paul.
Say again?
You're getting a bit twitchy. Too
I
many
am,
red
yeah.
lines.
It's just one of those things that I don't like. Don't like it when it's telling me off.
Yeah. No, I get you.
Um, we all have our, oh, that's caps lock. That's not going to work. Cool. And then that gets rid of
Yeah.
that.
Get rid of that one.
That gets rid of that. And look, okay. Cool. So if we can get rid of the task status then. And what we're going to do is, I like the idea here though, having Boolean closed or closure. I like the term closure in code. Closure change. There you go, like that.
Oh, there we go. I see what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been writing too much JavaScript, so the idea of writing the word closure feels.
Yeah. Does it make you satisfied?
It feels like I'm using a reserved keyword, and I know I'm not, but like I just
Yeah.
feel like I am.
It's interesting. Like that idea of, performing an evaluation, or that, not that idea, but like that structure, or that, the way of performing an evaluation and then storing that and then using that Boolean that happened to you. Like, I don't tend to use that structure a lot, and I don't know why. I think that's just a habit
What, doing this?
that,
You mean the
yeah,
closure?
exactly. Where like line 36, you're doing the, task is closed, not equal to trigger.map.get.
I'll
Like,
be honest with you. Were we not on this live stream, and like were this like code that Paul was writing by himself,
yeah,
this would probably be in here.
yeah,
Part of the
okay.
reason I wouldn't do it is normally because it's not too wide for the screen,
Yeah, okay, well, that's fair.
which is
Yeah.
which is again like not a personal preference thing, but
Mhm.
I think often a stylistic thing people have around, like, it has to be screen width, otherwise it's.
Right, and that's what I mean, prettier as like a, auto formatter can be good, but at the same time, sometimes what comes out, I don't like reading. Like the goal is to make it more readable, but I find sometimes it doesn't do that. But I'm what I have heard, for people who have done that, is that, doing that evaluation sort of outside of the context of the actual,
Mm,
if condition test can make reading the if condition test easier if you like word your variable names the right way. So like I am, I'm sympathetic to that point of view. I just don't tend to do it because
yeah.
I I haven't. That's just not. Again, it kind of comes down to personal preference and habit. Why haven't I done that? That's just not really how I learned.
I think
So
it's also as well like how complex it is. I mean, this is not the most complex. There's two things we're comparing here, or two
yeah,
things we're doing as an and.
yeah.
Like if it was 5 or 6, it just becomes awful.
Yeah, like
Um,
there was one if condition that I have a recollection of, that the guy who wrote it told me it took him half a day. It
yeah,
was like,
we've
that
all had
just sounds like it was too hard.
yeah, it's not pleasant that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I've run the tests. Things are still working, and this is the point at which soapbox moment number 2 of the stream. This is why we have tests. This is why we write our tests like early and often. Is because it's now very easy for us to verify that my
Paul
fat
didn't break
fingers have
things.
not gone in and broken everything. So that's good. The other thing that just before we move into cutting this out, I wanted to chat through is this wonderful little note from Mr. Chittum.
Yeah, so this
Um,
was interesting because as I when I initially wrote the update trigger logic and then I wrote the test, my test was failing and I was like, what's going on with that? And I had this realization that when we are performing the initial insert, or there were cases where the value in the account number of open tasks. So this field here that is the one that we're sort of affecting with this trigger logic, um, you know, would and should be null based on the way that we wrote the trigger. And also based on the data model, you could say, because like we're not using, for instance, a default value that would default it to 0, which would be a viable option, right? And it, I left this note purposefully so that Paul and I could discuss this a little bit, and because this is a valid discussion that arguably you would have as a project team to say like, okay, like we've discovered this. In some cases, having no open tasks might mean that number of open tasks field is going to be null. And in some cases, having no open tasks means that it could be 0. Are we happy with that? And
So the,
my sense, my own personal preference would be no. Like I would rather have one value always mean one state and another value always mean the other state. And so I didn't want to change it because I wanted this conversation as part of the live stream. So what are your thoughts on that?
my first response would have been to just mark this as complete and said it's met the tickets requirements. Like send it back to the if the PM wants to add a new ticket in, that's fine, but it's not a bug.
Yeah.
Second thing would have been to blame the admin that created the field. The serious, the very serious answer is I think that this is a good conversation that you would have with the PM or whoever defined the end user to say, how are you planning on using this field? Because
Right.
if you are only using it to say that you want to know that an account has some open tasks,
Mhm.
then because I think our original requirement that was very well written. So yeah, I can identify those accounts that need a greater amount of focus from the team. Very typical kind of requirement, very well written by a detailed project manager. Um,
Absolutely. They spent
exactly.
hours on that requirement.
I know. This is why I'm not worried about Chat GPT taking my job, is because this is the level of requirements that most of us get. But the honest thing here is that it's this part is that so that I can identify those. So if you're only planning on using this in a report, you might only want to say like, show me those accounts where it's null or there are less than 5.
Mhm.
Is that okay? Do you want to have a little visual indicator on the account that tells you that there's not enough? How are you actually planning on using the data?
Right.
Um, so my personal thought here is that I would suggest to the PM that we set it as a default of 0, because it just fit. And again, this is a smelly sort of thing where it feels better that null and 0 are different things.
Yeah.
So I would personally say we should go in and fix this. So should we do that for 2 seconds?
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
And then we'll break our tests, right?
right. So that's going to also mean going
Code
to that
changes.
custom field and setting a
Yeah.
default value too.
I realize that people cannot see the screen, but I hope everyone can trust the fact that I am able to set a default on a field. If not, then default value of 0. Okay, and this might allow me to jump onto soapbox number 3 in a minute, but let's just see if we can run this test, because I've changed it in the background now. We're going to run these tests,
Have
and
we changed the test though? Because the test was testing for null. So,
we haven't. And this is so I want to show that it's going to fail
oh, okay.
first, and we're
Yeah.
fixing it for
Got
the
it.
right reasons. So
Ooh,
um,
boom. Ouch.
60-40. Oof. So yay. So that should be 0,
Yeah.
I think, because if we just check our errors here, actual expected null, actual 0.
Right. Right.
And then click on the C one,
Method
and
delete. Right.
Fun fact, I wasn't sure if clicking on this was going to take me to the right spot in the code, but I'm very pleasantly surprised. Good work to whoever wrote that plugin.
Nicely done.
Cool. Okay, and we're going to reset and rerun. Ooh, hello. Expected null actual. Okay, is that still the same? Test single closed task. Ah, it had it in multiple places. Yes, so just to clarify, this test is checking that if it's never incremented, it is never incremented, as in deleting a completed task doesn't matter.
Right. Got it.
Right, we'll just one last rerun because our tests are running nice and speedily. So this, as I'm confident enough that this is going to pass, yeah. This gives us a really interesting other conversation point about which we might get into a bit more in a minute, but I'm going to briefly touch upon it here, which is like testing against the database and mocks and stubs and things like that. And like, as we go through this, we will touch briefly upon the idea of a mocking framework. I personally am against using or don't use. I'm not against. I don't use mock setups for S objects and things like that in many instances. I think that there are times when you can create in-memory instances of objects and use them, but I'm not a fan of like having wrapper classes in too many instances and mocking wrapper classes and all this stuff. And this, I think, is a good example of why, is because we have fundamentally just changed the behavior of the system by changing it to have a default value. And if we were using a wrapper class there or a mock, we possibly would not have found that. And that could have fairly big input. We could have had a null pointer exception or something else come up, all of those different things. So this is why I am very much pro working against the database as much as we can.
Right, where it makes sense, obviously.
Yeah, I think there are some instances where I am big on mocking, like where we have to like HTTP callouts and things like that. But to kind of get into the mocking conversation a little bit as it becomes part of the refactoring part in a minute, is mocking was originally designed when you were working against possibly changing databases where you didn't have the ability to tear down data as easily. Like for those of us that have worked on other platforms and systems. So if you've worked on like a Java system, a .NET system, a Ruby system, whatever, you'll have a database and you'll have a local development instance. You'll have a UAT instance, you have a production instance, and anytime you run tests, you're creating data on that database and then have to tear that down. And that can be really like time-consuming, costly, doing database migrations. And it might also be a different database because Oracle, for example, is a paid-for database for every instance you have. You are not going to be running an Oracle database on your local machine. You'll probably run a SQLite database because it has very little memory input, or maybe a Postgres one if you're working on Postgres across all your system, you might do that. So you'll need an ORM to allow you to map between the database and the thing. And then when you've got that ORM in, then you might start mocking it, because then you can just call instances and work with it and not worry about it saving to the database. And what if your database isn't down? Yeah, all of those things. None of that matters with Salesforce. Like, we have an ORM in there already. Your S objects are your ORM, your object relational mapping system.
Yep.
Your database is never changing as far as you are concerned. Your data is torn down after every test, because Salesforce, that was an amazing feature the Apex team added very early on.
Yeah.
I therefore don't think you need to have a mocking framework, and I would go as far as saying, controversially, that if your tests are running slow, and let's go back to soapbox number 1. If your tests are running slow, that's because your code is running slow and you're doing a lot of things, or your system's running slow. You might want to have a look at that. Like, that's a smell of in your org that some poor person sat there waiting for things.
And you're saying that it specifically in response to what I think is a common rationale for using mocking for S objects, which is it can speed up your tests, right?
Yes. That's one of the common pieces of rationale is that it can speed up your test execution. And whilst I get that, and I've worked on many a big system, like and many an ISV where some of the tests took hours to run. But that was a problem with that system, not a problem like it's not Salesforce's fault that you had too much logic going on. And when I've worked on a number of places where you end up having to move the test.start test around to kind of make sure
Mhm.
you could just about do enough to get through. It's like if that's needing to happen, or you've got that much data needing to be created up front, have a think about the different ways you could do it. So
Yeah.
um,
I think there's also so there's a another potential risk or downside that um and I'm saying this not speaking from the experience of a Salesforce project, but rather before that with software that I used to work with that was based on J2EE,
mhm,
which was actually very similar to Apex in that it had created an abstraction of that object relational mapping in its own API.
mhm.
And so, there was something very similar to like an Apex trigger. There's basically little Java extensions that you could write that could change the logic. And on top of this, I worked at a customer where they had written a whole bunch of abstractions on top of that. And in doing so, they had abstracted away the code that was meant to release database connections.
Oh, I can
And
see where this
lo
is
and
going.
behold, they were running into starved, a database connection pool leak.
Yeah.
And that was why. So I think sometimes, you need to really understand what it is that you're abstracting, or you can abstract away really important pieces of logic. That wouldn't happen in Salesforce, because like we don't let you do that. We don't let you manage database connections. Like there's nothing that you can do to cause database connection tool pool starvation in the JVM that underlies Salesforce because we just don't give you access to that. But there's certainly other ways I think where you could run into sort of abstraction pain if you're not doing it the right way. So
Yeah, and I think I'm also one of these again Puritans that I write as much code as I need to write to get the job done, and then no more. And I think that you can end up with there are times and instances in very big organizations where an enterprise framework like fflib has great uses in certain instances.
yeah,
Should you install fflib in a brand new org where you've got nothing? No. Like you've just added, and this is nothing against fflib. This is just a general thing of don't go adding code to make your code work that you don't need. It's you're adding code for the sake of code. Do you see what I'm getting
yeah,
at? It's like yeah.
yeah. No, I definitely
But,
sympathetic to that. So
so let's so now that we've made this brief update, let's talk about why we're going to refactor this into because I think what we're going to try and do to start off with is one of the common best practices is to not have code in or not have your logic in a trigger.
right,
And there's a few reasons for that are often given, one of which is testability. Because it should be easier to test your code in an Apex class than a trigger because you don't necessarily have to run the trigger. You only have to exercise the code in isolation in that method. So it makes it more testable if you want to.
hmm
For us here, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference because we are updating a related object. So if you imagine here, just as an example, we're going to want our tasks to be inserted because we're going to need to update the account that they're related to. And to do that, we're going to need an account record created.
yeah,
Now, anyone that's just listened to my small mere mocks, kind of diatribe a second ago, might just be like, aha, but if you were using a mocking framework, you wouldn't need that. my retort to that is going to be like, but we want to test that like it's actually working against the database and find things like nulls.
Right.
So the first thing I think we want to do is create a new class, and we're going to call this task trigger handler. And we're going to call that as the naming convention because it's a bit of foreshadowing, and who doesn't love a bit of foreshadowing? And B, what else are we going to call it? Like, Mitch, whatever we,
Yeah.
give it a name if we
Thingy.
want.
Thingy is usually very descriptive.
Winnie. Say Winnie or Thingy?
Thingy?
Oh, Thingy. I thought you said Winnie. I was like, oh, it's a very personal choice, that one.
Yeah. That would be another one of those personal preference things.
Yeah.
Nice.
What I'm going to do as well is I'm just going to turn off Copilot because it's
I'm
disable completions for a bit. Thank you, Copilot, for trying to help. So we're going to do this, and we've got a public class. We've got with sharing turned on because we still want sharing enabled. First thing we're going to create a method here for our first thing, which is an after insert, right?
And right there, because the trigger context is system by default, isn't it?
The trigger context is system by default.
Yeah. And so again, like to the question that you brought, the probing question that you put out there, why would we put trigger logic into a class? Like right there and is exactly one, which is you may not want all of your trigger code to run in system context.
Always a good idea to have your security model enforced somewhere along the line.
There you go. Yeah.
So I'm gonna do this, and we're gonna create this as a static method for now. Are we? No.
Okay. Really?
So this is one of these because again, for those watching along, we do know where we're going to go in this. Or as much as it might seem as Pete and I are just like randomly shooting in the dark, there is a kind of end state we have envisioned, I think.
Yeah. Or Paul does anyway.
Yeah, hopefully. If we were doing this in the purest sense of the word here, you could argue that you would create this as a static method because it doesn't need an instance of the class to run.
Right.
Because I know where we're going, and because we love a little bit of foreshadowing, as I say, we're going to just create this as an instance method. It's not going to return anything because it doesn't need to, and we're going to call this after insert.
Yeah, and to be fair, in the way that I've typically written code, like if I just want a handler method that's going to be called by a trigger, I would write that as static. There's really no need to go and do instantiation. But yes, I could see how we might not want that. So moving forward.
It's more just to save me having to go and delete a bunch of code.
That's just thankless refactoring. So
exactly. So what we're going to do then is we're going to grab the code here in our after insert. Voila. And we're going to paste it away. Now, first thing we're going to notice is we have a context variable here, which is trigger.new. And we don't really want to have it referenced in trigger.new. We probably want to pass in a list.
Even though that does work.
It does, yeah.
But that's, to me, that would be another smell thing, frankly. Like having, even though the reference is existing in the context of the execution context of this class, not having passed the reference to me just feels wrong.
Oh yeah, completely. And I think there's an interesting thing we can get to in a minute about what we're going to pass in and why. We'll just go with a new list here for, keeping it simple.
Sounds good.
And we're going to get rid of our trigger.new reference there and make it a new list. We have a reference here to act prefix, key prefix. So let's go and grab that. Well, we actually have a reference to all three of the things above, don't we? So as we use them in multiple places.
Yeah.
So we'll add them in as private instances, private member variables. And I think that should work for us then. So just save this. I've just deleted. Oh no, I haven't. It's there. I've just gone a bit code blind. And so we're going to do, again, trigger task trigger handler. Handler equals new task trigger handler. And we're going to do handler dot after insert. And new list is going to be, so we have to cast here. Oops, you have to include the right brackets, and it's trigger dot new. And I hope that we think this is fairly sensible as a first little extraction for it to work.
Is that casting really required?
I think so. I always do it because I like to make it clear, if nothing else.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, should we, as I genuinely, it's one of those things I feel like it is needed, but I'm just going to say and just try it.
Because I don't do that normally, and I don't. And I'm pretty sure it worked.
There's only one way to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's deployed, so right. So
and I don't care one or the other. So feel free to cast. If it makes you more comfortable.
If we did things that purely made me comfortable, Pete, we'd be here. Like, Paul's level of comfort should not be the defining factor. Okay, cool. Our tests have passed still, which is good. So cool. So we have done our after insert, and let's now do our after update, which is. Do you see what I mean? Like, I've just removed an additional space that was at the end of something. Like, if we went purely based upon my comfort, we would be genuinely here for a long old time. Public void after update. Now, what have we got in here that we're referencing? So we've got trigger.oldmap and we've got trigger.new. So I'm going to sort of ask your opinion here. I'm going to just say the letter S in long pauses. Do you here we have the option of what we pass in, and we've got an interesting option here where we are using trigger.new, which is a list of S objects, and we have trigger.oldmap, which is a map of S objects.
Right.
Do we want to have a consistent thing here where we're going to say we pass in a map of ID to task, which is going to be our new map? And do we also say we're going to have a map of ID to task, which is going to be our old map? And then we can simply get the list of values from this rather than having a list and a map. You see what I mean? Like, they're more perhaps useful.
Right, because if we ever wanted that map version, we'd have to go back and sort of reconstitute it locally.
Exactly.
Yeah, and or cheat and just reference the one that we know just happens to be there.
Yeah, and that's what we really want to avoid doing is cheating.
Yeah. So personally, I don't really have I'm not really I'm not dogmatic about this. I think if I was just writing sort of a one-off handler method, I would probably implement what I needed, and if I knew I didn't need a new map, I probably would just do trigger.new. But in this case, because we know the direction is, going in the direction of, trigger framework, and we're sort of moving in that direction. I think maybe new map would make more sense, that gives us the most versatility, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm writing this by myself, I'm also probably actually using a map here. I would probably use new. I would probably just by default, if I'm thinking about a trigger context variable to pass in, it's always the new map or the old map rather than the new or old list.
And that would be where it's available. So, for instance, before insert, there is no map because we don't have IDs yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So wherever I can, I would have the maps just because I find that they are handy to have.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's. That totally makes sense.
Cool. So we want to go back here to our task trigger. For those watching along as we're doing this as well, if you have any thoughts or comments or things where you think you guys are way off on this, please don't hesitate to shout out. We love hearing from those watching along, love the engagement, and also are very fallible. So fallible? That's the correct word, isn't it? Both of us are human and we'll get a lot of things wrong. So the fact that we're just copying and pasting at the moment is the reason that we haven't already had to Google something. So,
Was fallible what you were looking for?
Fallible is the word I'm looking for. Yes.
Fallible, yeah.
Thank
definitely.
you. I am fallible enough to not know the correct word.
Well done.
Wrong one, that one. So let's just rerun our test again. And note that I'm doing this doing one at a time. I think one of the things I always kind of instructed when I was training kind of people how to do Apex or training new developers is take your time, do things in steps. You don't have to go, I'm going to refactor the entire class now and do it all in one. It's like do things bit by bit, and you are less likely to end up wanting to cry when something goes wrong. It just life is code never works the way nothing ever works the way you expect it to the first time. Okay, so public void after delete. And we've got trigger.old, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to use the old map again. Oops. Because that is the way. That sounded like I was on The Mandalorian then, but that is the way I think it's going to work better. There we go. That's correct. Cool. And so we just want to pass in trigger.old map into the after delete. Just a test class. If you save the other class first, then it can even work out the references. There we go. And my favorite thing, I really do have a real love for just running tests and seeing them go green.
It is very satisfying. I totally agree with you. So one of the things that we didn't that is a bit different from where we left off last time is the switch statement here.
Yes.
So while those are running, just this to me, like this part of the implementation of switch in Apex when they came out with it, was it 2018 or whenever? 2017, I want to say, because I go back and look at my blog post every time I go and do this.
Yeah.
Because I wrote the blog post about when we launched it. I think the ability to do the switch on the trigger operation type was an inspired move by Chris Peterson, who was product manager at the time. And presumably it was his idea, or at least he's the one who greenlighted it and put it on the roadmap as product manager. Because it makes reasoning about what's happening in a trigger so much easier. And I think this is a great example of, when code reads well. And, so to me, I've loved that change in Apex compared to it wasn't terrible, but it was still a bit tortured to write like the perfect if statement that would, encapsulate the same logic. So, yeah.
You'd end up with situations, I think, where you'd end up, where we were talking about the extraction of Booleans earlier on like this.
Right.
You'd end up with a lot of Booleans that'll be at the start being like, is before insert, is after insert, is, but blah, 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 just to make it so that you could actually have simple, easy to read code. And the switch statement is so much faster as well. So in these instances where you're doing something and just want it to fly through, and
do you mean in writing the code or in actual execution?
In actual execution, switch statements Yeah, switch statements are faster than if statements. It's because they're because they are like where it's on an enum, for example, here for operation type. It's a
Right.
very fixed, defined thing versus like an if statement where it's comparing two values and may have to cast them and do all sorts of weird and
Okay.
wonderful things. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
I mean, if you did that kind of extraction where you had the is before insert and had the boolean already worked out,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
makes it a bit more comparable. But it's there's and we're on about milliseconds here, so it's hardly
Right.
it's less important than whether or not your internet provider is working properly. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
but yeah, I think it's an important, helpful little thing, and as you say, it just reads nice. So we have extracted to a trigger handler. And I suppose the thing that's probably worth talking about now is why just why. But
Just why?
why would we go about doing this? And I think that there's this good part to just to re-hit upon that point of like a code smell. Here, this just reads better. It's much easier to read, and if you're coming into the code here, and if I was a brand new developer and I said, okay, I've got to edit the after update piece of logic for this task, I can say, okay, I need to go to task trigger handler and it's calling the after update method. I can go here and I can just go, okay, well, I don't care about the after insert and I don't care about the after delete. The number of developers that never collapse code
Hmm.
is
Oh,
is
it's like
unbelievable.
so essential to like
Oh
if
yeah.
you're trying to focus on something, getting all of the other
Hmm.
non-relevant at the moment stuff out of the way. Yeah, super
Yeah,
helpful.
and it also is the point of kind of like the encapsulation. If you've done it properly, you don't care about what after delete is doing.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and so yeah, so I can come in here now and I can see what's going on, and I can just start making my edits as I need to. So that's the kind of smell part there is one big thing. We have now abstracted this so that we are passing in maps of data. If we wished to, so let's pretend that. Well, if we wish to, we could now update our tests so that they didn't actually run the insert of the task. So if I wanted to, I could now do this. I could do task trigger handler,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
handler equals. If I could type properly, this would be brilliant. And I could do handler dot after insert, and I'm just passing a list. So I would say new list task. And the shorthand is TSK. So I could do that, and I could go in here and I could set. I think it's closed is be writable for me. Let's have a look. It might not be a writable field, so this may fall on its fall apart very quickly here. This is where we
We'll
would use
see.
the status. So here's an instance where it doesn't work because obviously we've got a non-writable field, but we could, if we would, is this that's the insert single task. What was this? This doesn't have this is a not started status anyway, so it doesn't matter. So is closed would be false. So, um,
Yeah.
but we have instances here where we have the ability, and this is much more important or more relevant on, say, an account trigger, where there isn't the need to have a parent object to the account,
Right.
and that has now run there in 334 milliseconds to do that. It's very, very quick and easy to do so. We, however, are going to test against the database because we are referencing the what ID, and I think that's the easiest way of doing it. As a note here, just as again, personal choice or personal preference. When we talk about being dry and not repeating ourselves, we have a lot of repetitions of things in here, like
Right.
creating
Yeah.
accounts again and again and again.
Yep.
So we could definitely look at in the future extracting some of the account creation, at least up here, to a data setup method, and other things like that. We won't do that now, but the don't repeat yourself principle goes all the way through your code, not just on the actual handlers or whatever.
And then there's even getting to the point of just having a class that the whole job of it is setting up and tearing down possibly. Well, I guess you don't have to worry about tear down, but setting up all of um, the uh,
Stuff.
the data, basically a set of utility methods we talked about this earlier, which is having a test data factory, right?
Which does remind me of one of the things I was going to say about when we were talking about mocking. That a lot of people don't use static resource mock. Have you?
Oh,
That is if you are working in a complex environment where you need to get a bunch of data loaded in, go away and look into that and work with it properly, because that can
and that's
really kind
that's
of
where you have like a CSV basically as a static resource that you can, instead of executing Apex code to create that data, you can
mm,
essentially use the data in the CSV as a way of creating the data. So
yeah.
without
and you
writing all the logic for it. Yeah, that's a super valuable feature. I agree.
and you can do parent and child relationships, and it does it, and it can do references based upon a custom key, and
Mhm.
you can do multi-static resource mock, I think it is, where you can insert multiple static resources at once. It's it's a
I've not
super
used that,
powerful.
so yeah.
Yeah. As a for anyone who wants to find out more, I do one of the big things. One of the things I'm so big about testing on is I do have a course on testing where we go through using that. If anyone's interested, have a look on Udemy for astronomical apex testing. I can put a link below later with a coupon for it. But it's such an important feature that
Yeah.
um, that especially for an ISV. ISVs, I think it is actually a game changer for. When I used to work at Financial Force, we used to have to create a ton of data for testing. You had to have
I bet.
accounts and contacts and products and invoices and line items and journals and yada and ledgers and all this stuff. And just being able to whack in a bunch of that stuff through there would have been a lifesaver. So
Yep.
anyway, so we're at
Well,
this
and
point
to
now.
that point, we have the bulk test that we did, the bulk test that we did on insert. Like that would be a really
Yeah.
good candidate for,
Mhm.
instead of, writing this, this for loop that's going to create 201 um,
Yeah.
tasks, right? You just simply get that into a CSV, with just the data you want, and then you can use that static resource mock feature.
Yeah, it's an absolute lifesaver for difficult data sets. If you are an ISV and you have complex amounts of data to work with, have a look into it. So
Cool. Pro
so
tip.
pro tip. So moving on from this, then, this is again another point where we could just stop and say we are good here, we are done. Like there is nothing wrong with this code. I mean, there's probably some things wrong with this code, but this code is working code. It is tested code. It does what we need it to do. There is no reason for us to not just say great job, off to the pub. We could be,
Right, right.
yeah, exactly. We could do that now, and that would be great. We know we want to kind of continue on to build out a more kind of overall framework, but again, it's really important that if you're a developer who is especially so as an example, if you are a solo developer or a developer working by yourself, even if you work for a kind of large consultancy, working for a small customer. So I worked with a charity, and this charity had 4 people in it and needed a
Mhm.
bit of trigger logic code. So I did a bit of trigger logic code. And okay, I have available to me a handler and a class. Yeah, I have available to me all these things because I've used them 7,000 times before. But there would be nothing wrong with me either having the trigger that we wrote originally and just having that in there and leaving that, or having this version of it in there and then that's tidy enough. You don't have to go the full hog every time. I would suggest wherever possible you think about having a lightweight framework in there to make it easier for anyone that comes in the future.
Right.
But that client, and this is different for ISVs, for consultancies, for internal developers, I have never been paid by as a consultant to sit down and someone's going to be, listen, I've got this requirement, but could you write for me the perfect code for it that's going to be extensible and like would win an award? If you could do that for me, that would be the best thing.
Right.
Most people go, yeah. I say to them, oh, it's going to take 4 hours, and they go, oof, could it not take three? I'll go, that's how consultancy works. You are being paid per
Hmm.
hour to get
Well,
stuff.
it goes back to the whole question of like, do you write like a whole mocking framework around every S
Yeah,
object that you work? Like, your users aren't going to know.
that's a key thing. Like,
Your
no one
business
else.
stakeholders aren't going to know. And yeah, if you can do it without, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I think especially if you've got a single like as an example, if you've got a single trigger in an org and that's it, like
Hmm.
if someone comes in and starts adding extra triggers in and extra bits of logic around it, then do you know what? They're probably going to want to rework your trigger anyway. In which case,
Right,
this is a nice enough piece of code to refactor, and they might put a framework in to kind of handle it. But
right, right.
with that said, we have some stuff we are repeating ourselves doing both in this code, but also we could see that we're going to be doing some of this logic again and again and again
Yeah,
elsewhere.
yeah.
So
So to me, I think, the thing that is most intriguing is, creating some kind of abstraction of this, you know, the the logic is to sort of track all of um, the incrementation and the decrementation of
mhm.
the tasks that we're potentially looking at, and that's I think we said that earlier, but that to me is a really attractive one to look at. Is there anything that you had in mind?
Well, mine was more looking at some of the logic around this to make it reusable in
Oh,
different areas. Because
okay.
I mean, this is where kind of where I want to get to from experience is this, and like all of
Oh,
this goes. Oop, all of this that was meant to be a really magical moment, and I just completely fluffed my line. There you go, goes away, and it
right.
yeah. But that can be that I think is a further step on. So why don't I hand over driving to you, and let's start talking through extracting some of this count map stuff.
Yeah, and I've been mulling this over as we've been going through this session, and um, I'm finding myself a little bit sort of twisting myself around a bit because, you know, like my design preference is to want to create a little helper method that is going to take in um that so just talking through. So if the is closed value has changed and this task is an account task, right? So that, looking at line 12,
Mhm.
uh, then we want to do something with, we want to record the fact that we have basically a task that means something to us, right? And so then we have to check whether count map has a key for this what ID. So do we already have we already encountered this account, um, this account ID rather in some other task, and then if we have, we increment it, or as is the case in another one, we possibly decrement. Um, and then if we haven't, we have to actually um, do yeah, we have to. Sorry, no. If we haven't found it, then we just put a one. If we have found it, then we're going to increment and decrement the current value. So, I'm thinking that what I'm going to need, and maybe I should start actually doing something with this now that I've talked it through.
So
Um,
before you do,
yeah.
I've got an alternate kind of suggestion
Okay. Yeah.
question for you. So And forgive me here for kind of going through and just saying, like, we're going to talk this out a little bit more than perhaps we would normally if it was you and I. But why are we doing the counting?
Uh, do, do, do.
So we're
Yeah,
gone.
because we've we're treating this in as a bulk operation, right? So we can't assume that we won't have more than one task
Mhm.
that's being saved, right? And so, you know, if we were to uh if we were to encounter is this am I going the direction that you're looking for me to go?
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
what I
If
suppose,
if
what I
we
suppose
were
my better
to
question would have been is, so we're doing this. We're doing this counting because we're trying to keep a running
a
tally.
running tally, yeah.
Right. Is there a way, he says, is there a way that we could get a count of the number of open tasks related to some account IDs?
Oh, so are you thinking of actually like querying for this?
Yeah. So what we're doing, because and like my thought here is, and this is not definitively a way to go. I just am a massive fan of aggregate queries,
Okay.
but what we're doing here is, in my mind, the way this is looking, and this is Paul's
Ooh,
terrible code counting here. So this is a real peek behind the curtain as to how Paul's brain works. But
okay.
here we're doing a loop with some logic. And if we've got 200 tasks, we're looping through this loop 200 times, great. We're then, and let's just say that there's 200 different accounts on there.
Mhm.
We're then querying for 200 records here,
Right.
looping back over 200 records here, and updating those 200 records. Okay.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're doing one query, one loop through all the tasks, and one loop through all the accounts. My thought would be is there a way of us going away and saying, well, can we remove some of this counting logic here that we don't need?
Mhm.
Because we're adding in, we're getting like we're getting the set of IDs here anyway.
Right.
We could then remove some of this logic where we're having to increment, decrement, or worry about it being zero. And
Mhm.
this would actually have dealt with our edge case earlier on of null, because we would have had zero and we would have stamped null onto zero onto the null rather than it being null, if that makes sense here. Remember earlier on we had last,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just wonder whether that might be a interesting route for us to take that might collapse the code down a little bit and allow us to kind of let Salesforce do the work for us. Is just a
Okay,
thought.
so
And then
so
sorry, go on.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So just to understand this a bit further, um, you know, after insert, right, we're gonna get this list of tasks that have been inserted.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, uh, so at what point, like, talk me through like how you would see this playing out? Because I'm, and this is partly me, is like I tend to I can be a little bit slow to catch on to these things.
It's,
So
this isn't you being slow. This is very much me having written this same bit of code like 9 times and nerded out on it. So to be very clear here,
yeah,
Paul is leading the witness and
yeah, yeah.
probably like show you the page of the book that Paul's thinking about. Um, if we let me just write it in kind of commentary here then. So if we said,
Okay,
so add account ID to set, yep.
okay. Hmm.
Then we're going to go. So we want to retrieve all accounts in the set.
All right. Yeah. Hmm.
And ooh, hey, that was not what I meant to do. Apologies. And then we also would here go through and say run we wouldn't say run aggregate query for tasks grouping by account, and then
Okay.
we would do kind of a then we would here update the update value using query, and then we would just run the update call. Now, the bigger benefit. So, does that make sense as to what I'm thinking? And I know that someone in the comments or watching the stream later might say, "But Paul, you've gone from having one query to two queries." It's like, yes, I now have an extra query, but that's not the most expensive thing. But I've got rid of some logic here. But more importantly, if we come down to here, all of this logic
Goes
values
away. Interesting.
goes away.
Okay.
So
Sorry. All right.
that's my thought. Like, and I know it's and again, I have written this same bit of code more times than I care to
Okay.
share.
So
But does that make
so let
sense?
let me start seeing if I can take a stab at oops, that didn't work. That's bizarre.
But is it
That
from your side, Pete? Does that make sense as to like my thought process around it and why we
I
might go down that route?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think I need to start going through it
Yeah,
to really get my head around it. So that's kind of why I think, jumping in
yeah,
and starting to actually build this, like, that may help. So this is just a live share problem. Normally, if I did control slash, I would get
Would you
all
like
those
me
lines
to
commented out, and it's
would you like me
not
to
working.
give
Yeah,
you the assist here?
there we go.
Do you want all of the lines from the if down, or just
Uh,
the middle block? I think there.
yeah, I think, yeah, there we go. Just that. So,
There we
okay.
go.
So then instead of this sort of like, do I have the key? You know, do I need to add something to the map? All I'm going to do here is, um, oh, and I'm also going to need uh, set caps lock off, set ID, count set. What do I want to call this? Count ID set equals new set ID. Oops. Okay, so now I'm going to be working with a set instead of a map. And all I really need to do in this instance is account ID set. Is it dot add yet? Add.
Yeah.
And then that is just going to be tsk dot what ID.
Mhm.
Okay, so now I'm just going to collect, wherever there's a task that is for an account and has uh well, in this case this is insert and isn't closed, then I'm going to do something with it. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
Um
Yep.
all right. Now this, instead of count map, I'm just going to use count ID set.
Mhm.
So there's not much to change there. And then what I want an aggregate task query. So let me go ahead and create list task tasks.
It will come back as an aggregate result type rather
Thank
than.
you. List dot aggregate result set. Aggregate result.
So whilst Peter's typing this out, for those, so one of the reasons we're doing this kind of set of videos is to help newer developers kind of get familiar with certain parts of Salesforce, understand why things are going on. The aggregate result type is an interesting special type you only get from aggregate queries, and
It's like
so
an in-memory S object.
it is that. And interestingly, this goes back to And I realize we've covered a lot of kind of things and concepts today that perhaps at some point, Pete, we might want to go back and think about certain different things in. So we covered the idea briefly of an ORM, an object relational mapping. And what that is a way of taking database stuff and mapping it into objects in memory in your language in Apex. And you have things like NUnit or not NUnit. No, NUnit's a unit testing framework. What was the ORM? Rhino, I think it was in .NET and others. Ruby on Rails, it has an ORM in it. It doesn't matter what database you connect to. It takes your database tables and creates Ruby objects out of them, so you can work with them. Salesforce does that out of the box with our S object. So the account S object, or the task S object here, is actually an Apex class that wraps our task database row, or database kind of concept. An aggregate result is just a special S object that they've created, but it's only in memory.
Okay, so what I need to do is select count. Actually, I need to sum, don't I?
No, count. We're not adding up a numerical value, so it's the count.
Right. Okay. Select count ID.
Yeah.
Comma. And the next one should be what? Yeah. What?
Yeah.
ID. And I'm going to alias this as account ID. That should work if I recall correctly.
I think
it's been a long time since I've written an aggregate.
Yeah. So the what we'll do in a second is I'm going to copy this out. No, because I don't have any data in there. But when Peter says alias, there is that if we don't do that, it'll come back as, I think it's expression 1, isn't it? EXPR.
Yeah, it's a generic like column header that gets used.
So count ID will still be expression EXPR 0 because we've not aliased that, but the what ID, rather than us getting the what ID or it being expression 1, will come back as account ID. And we are then grouping by the what ID. So yeah, talk us through, Pete, what this query is going to do for us so that people...
let's see if I get this right. Okay, and I'm just going to break it out so it's not quite so long. Okay, so what I'm looking to get, and I probably should have talked this out with myself, but I just thought I'd start writing. So what I want to know is how many tasks I have for each account that I care about. Right?
We have one more filter we want to add, which is where is closed equals false. Because we want the number of open tasks we're going to put on there.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
So this, like, aggregate queries are a super, super useful thing on the platform, especially for admins as well, just to allow you to kind of run. I use them all the time for running like quick analytics with customers, where it's like, okay, I've got a customer where they've got like 15 years of data in their Salesforce org, and I just have to sit down occasionally and be like, okay, you have 100,000 contacts, 13,000 of them were created in 2012 and haven't been updated since then. And you can just kind of, do these wonderful kind of grouping quick filters. So for dates, you can use calendar year, calendar month. Yeah, there's some really nice stuff you can do in there that just makes it really quick to be like, okay, I have had, we had one customer recently where we had a person in their database that had asked to be removed from all mailing lists in 1997, but was there when they migrated over to Salesforce in like 2009 because they were holding him for like 1997 was when they joined the database. 2005 was when they'd asked to be gone from the database, gone from like their mailing list, but they had to hold on to their record for financial reasons, for like reporting. And so this
Oh,
record was
wow.
still there because they hadn't like updated the policy hadn't updated to remove them in a weird way.
Wow.
It was like,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, you can
Data
do really
retention.
cool analytics. Anyway, so yes, that is our query, and I think that looks good.
Yeah. So basically, I'm gonna so by counting IDs, I'm gonna get the unique number, basically a unique ID for each task, and I can count those. Um, where and then what ID in this instance, this polymorphic thing is an account ID, so I'm aliasing it as account ID. Actually, I could do I should alias this as well and do this as task count, perhaps.
Mhm.
Um, that probably would make more sense. I'm going to select, so select from task. So that's the S object. I want to make sure the what ID or the account ID is in the account ID set that I populated up here. Um, I want to make sure I'm only getting open tasks, and then I'm going to group by what ID so that the count of IDs will be based on, yeah, the
Yep,
number of tasks for the account. There we go. A
perfection.
bit tortured, but I think I got through that.
No, it's not torture at all. It's useful to kind of talk through and make sure we got it. So
Yeah, yeah.
so then I think in our loop we then are looping through the account still, like that.
Right. So
So
that's still
line.
accounts to
Oh,
update.
sorry. 1 minute. Let me do that so it's clear for people on the screen. Apology. I'm like, why hasn't Pete scrolled yet? And it's because
Yeah,
it's on my
sorry.
screen.
Yeah. That is one of the downsides of this in sort of a live stream is that I only have control of being able to write the code. Paul has to move the screen around.
I'm his
Okay. So yeah, so
virtual assistant.
now I don't let me so current task count. I was basically getting right, count dot number of open tasks or 0. And then I was sort of adding that to it. And this is where I shouldn't need to do that anymore because in this case, that becomes irrelevant
Hmm.
because I've already gotten the actual accounting of how many tasks there are that should go into this number of open tasks value. So
Yeah,
uh, now then, let me think this through. So I have a list of aggregate result sets. Is there I'm probably overthinking this, but so account dot number of open tasks should be I need to find the row of this task account count aggregate result. Um, is there a way to map that up or like convert it
I
into a
think you
map?
do the inverse. So
Oh yeah, that makes
I think if
sense.
we make this a map, sorry, if
Yep.
we make this a map, then
Yeah.
we loop over this so we don't actually have to store it in memory
Yeah.
and just ping those, and then we're updating the values. So
That's good thinking, Lincoln. All
not
right.
just a pretty face. Do you want me to? I would say I was going to scroll up, and there you go.
Okay,
There's
so
that
if
music
I
under.
do, oh, this is one of my favorite. Let's see if this works. Is it Control D? Oh, yes. Oop, I went too far. Okay, so Control D or Command D rather, and we're going to make that a map. And here, I should be able to make it work. No, that's not going to work that way. So I'll just have to do ID comma ID comma. Okay, so accounts to update is now going to be a map. And so what that means is that down here, our query needs to do new map parentheses. And we should now have a mapped result,
Do we not need to have
which,
the type here?
sorry?
Do
Oh,
we not need to put the type there?
new map. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was missing that.
I thought you'd found. I thought you were going to show me some new, like, wonderful syntactical sugar I'd never seen. I was like, oh, speak.
No, wouldn't well, no, I mean, that's just me missing that little detail. So this is gonna become our aggregate result. Uh,
AR.
yeah,
No good way of naming aggregate results
uh,
or result.
yeah, we'll say, I don't know, whatever, yeah. Well, actually, I think the way to do that is to just rename that to task counts.
Do we want that? Because we're storing that at the top. Do we need that anywhere now? Because we could just put the
Oh,
query in line there, couldn't we?
oh, just, like, do an inline aggregate
Yeah,
result query?
yeah. Because I don't think we need it anywhere else. I mean, we've only
I
got.
I don't know. I would probably leave it because of having to format the query in the middle of a for loop condition, but yeah, you're right. It would absolutely work to just have the query go right into there.
I think it's fine if we want to keep it formatting for readability, but could I suggest then we wouldn't have it as a class level variable? It would only be for the method.
Sure. Yeah, that works.
Cool. I'll let me whack that down for you. So, like, again, for the viewer at home, this is like, there's nothing wrong with having it as a class level variable. I think from an encapsulation perspective, like, it's not data that the entire class needs. It's not something that we might pass around. We could argue that really with all of these three at the top: accounts update, count map, and now count ID set. They're all ones that are actually going to be only used in the method. But this is kind of how we are because we're bringing it across from our trigger at the moment.
Yeah,
I think
and I
as we
think,
go,
my tendency, and this is a bit stylistically, again, like, probably there could be arguments against this, is that if you're gonna use the same, uh, object, uh, you know, in several different methods, like, my tendency is to want to, declare that at the class level, um, as opposed to have the same instantiation in each different method. So, like, that's just something
yeah,
that
I
I've
suppose it's,
adopted as a habit.
yeah. I think there's because I think that the reason I would go the other way, and again, there's, to be very clear for everyone watching, neither of these are right nor wrong. Is I'd only have it in the I'd have it in the method rather than outside, because I anything I have for the class level, I'm always thinking I can share data between the methods.
Mhm.
Whereas in a trigger handler here, the methods shouldn't, like, I should never run after insert and after delete in the same,
Right.
one after
And
another.
what I would say is that that's partly why I would feel comfortable sticking it up there,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that
exactly.
these 2 methods should never be executing at the same time. You
No.
know, even if there was both a before and an after trigger that used both,
Hmm.
those are executing and completing their execution, and thus, like, not interacting with each other
Yeah.
independently, and they would never actually pass data back and forth. So anyway, so yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so now that I'm going over an aggregate result, I have to think through, how am I going to do this? What I want to do is, um so result counts to update. So counts to update dot get result dot. Oh, but I can't just do dot. I have to do result dot get,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I have to cast it, don't I?
Yes.
What is this simplicity you promised me, Paul
I
Battis?
know, but trust me, there is a method behind this madness in a minute. Like,
Okay,
I swear at the
so
end of this, you go, oh, yeah.
result dot get, and what did I call it? what was my alias?
You called it account ID.
Account ID.
Yeah.
Account ID.
Uh,
Okay, so that will
it
get
needs to be a
me.
string, Pete.
Sorry.
Needs to be a string.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. Okay, so get account ID. Okay, so that will get me my account record
Mm-hmm.
that's going to correspond to this particular result set or
Yep.
result that I've done. And then can I just do dot number of
Other
open?
outside the parenthesis.
Sorry. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you need another bracket. Yeah.
There we
And,
go. Dot.
outside the yellow one.
Oh yeah, thank you. Okay, dot
That's right.
number of oops of underscore open tasks C equals, and then we need to cast this to. Was this
It's an
is
integer.
this an integer? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so cast to integer. So to talk through like why I'm doing casting, if you're wondering why did he get all twitchy about needing to cast this value? Because aggregate result sets are these sort of generic things. All of the, you can have any number of, the of sort of attributes of an aggregate result, but they'll all be of type object. Not S object, but generic, the generic object class. So task count. Okay. How did I do there? So all of this, once I do result.get, what that's going to return is just an object type. And so I have to make sure to cast it to whatever it is I'm going to do with that. So, accounts to update.get result.get account ID. So go get the account that corresponds to this aggregate result and set number of open tasks equal to the task count for the same aggregate result. Thanks for commenting out that line for me,
That's
Paul.
right.
And then that's going to update the list that we retrieved, which we can, or it's going to in memory update the list that we retrieved with the right value for number of open tasks, and we can then go turn around and update that. I like it, actually. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this is, and then we just need to do values there, I think.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because we did turn that into a map. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and clean some of these comments up, just so we can make that a bit more readable. And I might go back and just put in some comments too later about like how we're doing that. So that's a really interesting way of approaching that. I mean I've used aggregate results, and but I don't know, for some reason, like for this type of thing, I'm not really considered it, but I do like that, and I think there's a certain elegance to it when all is said and done. Versus, it was a bit tortured, like making the map, make sure that there's a value in there, and like that sort of thing. So yeah, that's interesting.
So I think just as the aggregate result is a nice piece of, it's a nice useful utility that can get some stuff out. I think what we could do, just to go back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, what we could do here, if we wanted to make it more readable
Yeah,
elsewhere, we could do things like this. Now, I personally would leave the code as we've got, but I'm going to do this just to kind of make it obvious as to what it could look like to be a bit nicer, so that
sure.
you could say, okay, well, this is going to be, and we could even do this and just say,
Yeah.
and then so if we did that, the code here hasn't done anything different. It's still running exactly the same things. It's just
Yeah.
a bit more
Slightly more
Okay, I
readable.
can kind of see it. Yeah, and we could
Yeah.
also add in our null checker if we wanted to. We don't need to because it's ID sets everywhere, but yeah,
Yeah.
we could
Yeah.
do. So let's just hit save because I don't think again because of the live show I don't think Pete can save. Ooh, illegal assignment from list to map. So this is because we have changed this in the one place and not everywhere else in our code. So what
Right.
I'm going to
Oops.
do here is
Yeah.
I'm going to just do this real quick for the sake of kind of brevity here, and then but what I want to do is show people.
Well, and I can rename because it won't take the same name in both
No,
things, right?
so
So I
maybe
can rename this one.
yeah, if you don't mind doing that, that'd be good, and then that should work. I can, yeah, perfect.
We'll just call it accounts to update map.
Voila, deployed wonderfully. So
Boom.
we go back, we do Paul's favorite thing, run our tests again because it's the way we like to make sure that everything feels good. So it's like like Candy Crush or something like that, where you get the little dopamine hit running tests. Cool.
Paul's
So
dopamine hit is successful test run.
oh, great feeling. So what I wanted to, so the real kind of reason that I coerced us towards this option here is as follows. And so what I'm going to do is I want to just talk through how we are then able to do some refactoring here. So what I want to do real quick, if it's all right for me to just grab driving again,
Yeah, go for it.
is I'm going to make a new method here. Private. What am I looking to return? Private list. I don't even need to return anything. I can do void. Let's just do void and see how it works. Private void. Update. Open task count on accounts, and then we want to pass in set ID account ID. So again, I've done this done this particular set of code for though when I keep on saying I've done it a few times, it's in one of the books I've written, and I use it as a good example in teaching kind of code structure because I think this is a nice simple one for people to understand and think about refactoring. Just jumping ahead here, we as one of the things we said about was that we have this same kind of counting logic and manipulation going in 1, 2, 3 different places. We were doing this kind of incrementing and decrementing, incrementing and decrementing kind of logic, and we
Right.
don't
Yeah.
really want to do that. So what I think we can do here is if we were to just try and extract this into a method for now, well, what we're going to say is we pass in
And
this
by
set of
this, do you mean the retrieval of the aggregate results set and the update of the
yeah,
account?
because
Okay.
if I just move this down a second, right, and let's pretend that it looked like this because we didn't need the account map earlier on there, did we? So
True. Yeah, absolutely.
if I were to cut that out and paste that in here, and if I correctly label this as account IDs rather than account ID, this could easily be updated there, and that could easily be updated there. And I think we would all argue logically, hopefully, that if I then said with account ID set, this should be exactly the same, yeah? Because all I've done is I've taken exactly the same logic here. We're getting up, we have our map of accounts, we're retrieving it, we're getting our same number of tasks using the account IDs that we've been passed in. We're going through and updating them and just update. I think it should work. Seem logical? You've gone on mute, Pete. I think you've muted yourself.
Yeah, that's because somebody was ringing my doorbell.
It's okay. I was just sat there, like either
Yeah.
Pete's frozen or Pete's like looking at me as if to say I'm a madman right now. One of the two. And
Yeah. No, yeah. So I could definitely see that. It again, like I sometimes like I find myself wanting to avoid like and maybe this is because I've done more functional programming and I like that like the structure of functional programming is you pass something in and you get something out and you don't necessarily mutate things, you sort of create new things. And there's a downside and an upside to that,
Hmm.
but I like how it reads. So my tendency is to want to like get something and pass it out and then do that, like save it locally kind of thing. But I mean, it's a perfectly valid structure.
Oh, so you'd be
And
so to help clarify that for people, what you'd be wanting to do is something like list of
yeah,
accounts.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
let's do it that way. I don't think it
So,
matters.
as you've pointed out, as well, like this is, there is no wrong way to do that. And I'll even admit, like I like there may be some additional overhead to that because now all of a sudden I am also like possibly creating a new list, like so
Yeah.
there's um, you know, like is it more efficient in Apex to do it that way? Maybe not. It's just a tendency that I've started to develop. Mostly because I like it. It makes it more readable, and then I don't need to go if that helper method is buried somewhere in some other class. You know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I just need to know that it's going to get me back this list, and then I update the list locally, um, and I don't need to worry about that sort of mutation or that save operation happening somewhere else.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay. Yeah. I'll do that. So I'm not calling the same thing the same name twice. But there we go.
cool.
Okay. So then, if I now run the test again, because we know that I have my need to run them every 30 seconds.
Hey, do what works.
There we go, a little dopamine hit. But I'm just trying to, again, for those watching along, this is more just to keep on, you want to keep on running your tests and keep on checking things just to make sure that you haven't done something daft halfway through because we are
Yeah,
all human and we'll do things that are a bit funny. So here, what we could then do is go through here and again create a set of IDs. So we've got our account ID set. And I think in here we're already, so we're doing that in count map. So what I'm going to do here in the after update is start making a similar update where I go, okay, account ID set dot add, and it is tsk dot what ID. And then I can go away here and do council update equals, I'd want to rename this, but like, let's just say get updated accounts. Something like that, and that's a terribly named thing, so we can rename that properly in a minute. But I wouldn't want it to be called update because we're not
yeah,
doing the
because
update in there. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Foisted on
so
you by my functional programming sensibilities.
it's cool. I mean, again, it doesn't really make much difference to the code flow here.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good. And then again, we can do the same thing down here where we go, okay. And it is going to be tsk.whatID. And then accounts update equals. Okay, we don't need the dictionary up for that. And there we go.
Sign has come back.
And then what I'm just going to do is, for my own personal gratification, is just move this down to the bottom because it's a shared
Right.
method between the three of them. We don't need to know what it's doing. If you want to find it, we can just scroll down.
Yeah,
So if we
exactly.
do that,
I would do something very similar. Yeah.
um, and then we can again just do our quick run to make sure everything's working. But now I say quick run for this time. I'm going to take, ooh, we've got a failure. What have we done wrong? Expected 0, actual 1.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
So
curious.
test, delete, single, open.
And test update single.
Test, delete, single, and test, update, single task from completed to other.
You know, we're coming up on time, so this is the perfect cliffhanger to hook people
This is a
in
great cliffhanger.
to the
So
next episode.
yeah, so let's just, this is so let's call this as homework for me and Pete to go and figure out why it's erroring. But
I think that's good.
just
Yeah.
to wrap up here, the reason kind of I've guided us to this point is that next episode we're going to take what we've built here as a scaffolding for this and extract it into a generic kind of trigger handler framework. And we'll talk. I think one of the things you and I said we want to talk about was the idea of when's a framework and when's it just.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Yes. Yeah, because I think there's going to be a lot of definitions in that one. But the reason kind of I wanted to get to here was I think this shows nicely how we've done that refactoring to get rid of the logic.
Right.
Like all of the important stuff is now done here. It apparently isn't working, but it's done here at least. And like
it's done here incorrectly.
Exactly. There'll be something obvious that we've just not done.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
But the fact that we've extracted it down there just means that now these methods are doing the minimal amount. You know, if we had the update in there as well, we can have the update in here. If we had the update in here, we could even mark this if we wish to. And again, I'm not a proponent of this in general, but we could mark this as test visible and just go away and run this one method using a set of account IDs, and we can test that in isolation from any of the logic maps.
Yeah.
You know, we can do different things now in the testing, but more importantly is that if we want to update how we're doing the counting, we're updating it in one place rather than previously we had 3 different sets of logic for whether it was insert, update or delete. And I just think this is a bit nicer and cleaner now.
Yeah, no, agreed. Definitely. I like that.
Cool.
And it's reintroduced me to aggregate result sets. So that's good stuff.
No worries. Well, thank you very much, everyone who has watched along with us. I hope you've enjoyed it. In 2 weeks' time, Peter and I will be back going through the next. I think it's 2 weeks' time. We will verify that.
That was the plan, yeah. So, and I think that should hold true for me. So, that's the plan. 2 weeks' time.
2 weeks' time. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and leave a comment if you have any questions or just thoughts about it. Thank you again to Peter for coming and joining and working along with me. I've really enjoyed it again.
Yeah, and thanks to you, Paul, for setting this up. And that's having a fun time. So this is fun.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. This is it's if nothing else, it's just reminding me of I'm really enjoying talking out loud through the process because it's stuff like this kind of aggregate thing where my brain goes, oh, we do that because I've written it before. Yeah. Whereas now it's like, oh, wait, why did I do that again? Like, there's a good logical reason, but it's only when you kind of sit there at the end and go, that's the logical reason that it's good to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm definitely not used to like how I'm very mindful of I feel like I write code very slowly, and I feel like that especially on this, but I think taking the time to slow down and talk through it, I think just gives you a bit of it acquaints you better with what exactly that is you're doing. So hopefully that helps folks who are watching. Can't wait to do this again in a couple weeks.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.